Mobile gaming has come a long way over the years. There are some games that might not be a crazy AAA budget game, but can still be quite good for the genre, and a lot of those games do make their way to consoles. The game we're talking about today is called Forgotten Memories. It was supposed to come to consoles a couple times and handhelds as well. Well, the PS Vita missed out on one of those cancelled ports. The game has finally been fully remastered with a bunch of graphical gameplay and content additions for mobile platforms and Nintendo's hybrid console. Let's dive right in. Here is my review of Forgotten Memories Remastered for the Nintendo Switch. This story is about Rose, an investigator that visits an abandoned asylum in Massachusetts in search of a missing girl named Eden. Rose later wakes up inside the asylum injured and with very little memories of how she got there, only recalling that she had been shot. A woman named Noah speaks to her via recorded messages, sending Rose through the asylum to do her a favor in exchange for leading her to Eden. As a story, I think this is pretty good. There's a lot of background info about the asylum and characters the story revolves around, and since this is the remastered version, all of that backstory is voiced and read to you as you find the notes and files. While this technically does sort of lead into the next game that the developer is making, it works just fine on its own. And we even get a little extended ending sequence with this being the remastered version. When it comes to gameplay, this is a third-person survival horror game. In retro horror fashion, you're exploring a 3D asylum, gathering items for puzzles, and using weapons to fend off monsters that will attack you. To start things off, this is a remaster of the original mobile release from back in 2015. This version sports new graphics, redone audio, new interactions and rebalanced difficulty, a new difficulty setting for New Game Plus, an extension to the game's ending, among other things. Though if you do go into settings, do note that this may be copied from the mobile release, as some options do not appear to do anything. The virtual stick option, for example, I assume to be an on-screen analog stick for iOS and Android users, as turning it on Switch doesn't really do anything. With main progression, your goal in this game is to reach the end of the asylum. In retro fashion, there are locked doors everywhere with items and keys you need to find to access the next areas and move on. The puzzles are fairly easy to figure out, like hitting switches to open up doors or finding tools to help you fish an item you need out of a sink or a drain. You also need to worry about your flashlight and enemies. Depending on your choice of difficulty setting, the flashlight you use in the game will continually drain its battery, and you'll need to recharge it at charging stations set up on the walls in various areas and halls of the asylum. You can pretty much infinitely recharge the flashlight, but if you play on the harder difficulties, you get faster battery drain and will likely be visiting these stations often. Enemies will also follow you around. At the beginning of the game, you see all these mannequins littered around in morbid and strange settings, as if they're decorations in the asylum. But the mannequins are the main enemies of the game. Once they can start appearing, mannequins that were already in the rooms you visited will randomly come to life and attack you. Sometimes this is scripted when you have just gotten a key item, but many of them will turn into enemies on one room visit, but not on the next visit to the same room. I find this to be a great way to keep up the creepy and horror element. As soon as I realized that the mannequins I'd seen all over were actually enemies, I was a little more cautious in every room, not knowing which ones were just mannequins and which ones were not. To combat these enemies, you find a steel pipe, revolver, and shotgun around the asylum. The combat is a simple aim and attack system, though you will find the enemies of this game a bit more tanky than you might expect. The normal enemies can quickly drain your pistol ammo from 20 to 30 down to less than 10 from even a couple of enemy encounters. I found myself always using the steel pipe unless I was fighting multiple enemies at the same time. Now, as you do all these things, you're going to find the inspiration. A lot of people say that Forgotten Memories is inspired from the older Resident Evil and Silent Hill games, and you can really tell. Though I'd say it's more of a Silent Hill inspired game overall, with just a little bit of Resident Evil here and there. The asylum is incredibly dark, and the designs of the areas and monsters, the sounds and door transitions, along with the flashlight function and even some of the background music, heavily reminds me of the Silent Hill franchise. In fact, the whole game feels like a single Silent Hill dungeon, all the way down to how the boss works towards the end. The only thing that I noticed that I feel is pure Resident Evil is how you save. You find desktop computers from time to time in areas that kind of feel like save rooms, each with 2 floppy disks you collect to perform manual saves. Now, I quite like this game's system. Exploring the different areas, listening to the documents as you find them, and fighting once I got the hang of it was a lot of fun to do, especially with how creepy and scary this game is. Speaking of, the game does a great job at keeping the whole game very creepy. The visual design is pretty good with the worn down asylum, the mannequins, the dolls, and just how everything looks. It's also got that creepy transition from time to time where you walk back into areas you were just at and things look different. More mannequins have shown up to block your exit, or you go through a door expecting to be in an asylum hallway and you load into a completely new area that you have to solve to get back to the asylum. Another interesting thing I noticed was in a puzzle room, nothing was moving around. I'd left the game on idly as I was researching on my laptop, and several minutes after Rose had been standing still in the room, one of the mannequins randomly became active and attacked Rose, seemingly having no trigger outside of just being in the room too long. But one thing I really suggest you do, and actually the game suggests as well when you first boot it up, is lower the brightness. At its default level, you don't really even need the flashlight to see everything going on in a room. While you are forced to use the flashlight to interact with things, the game telling you it's too dark to see without it being on, the more proper brightness level is about half of the default setting. It doesn't completely darken every room, but it makes the game far creepier when everything is pretty dark and you need the flashlight to reliably maneuver around the asylum. As all of this comes together, I think this is a pretty good horror game. The combat mechanics can be a little clunky at times, and I wasn't a huge fan of the fact that you never get a map of the asylum, relying on your memory and signs on walls to know where things are. But with it being inspired by some of the old horror games, some of the clunky mechanics kind of fit. Though this adventure will not last very long. I mentioned earlier that the entire game feels like a single dungeon in a Silent Hill game. And that's true for its length. Forgotten Memories shouldn't take you more than maybe 2.5 hours to be able to trek through. I managed just under 2 hours on the normal difficulty without using a guide to see what I needed to do or where I needed to go. But the game also has New Game Plus with new weapons and ammo exclusive to that mode, along with costumes and a harder difficulty. The developers are also working on updates and DLC for the game with new story chapters to expand upon it. Next, let's talk about controls in the UI for a moment before diving into presentation. This game can be fully played with the button controls of the Switch, though a lot of things can be used with the touchscreen as well. Menus are easier to navigate, for example, with the touchscreen, as the D-pad doesn't do anything in this game. Only the analog sticks can be used to move around options and menus in your inventory, which is a little bit clunky. It's a lot more fluid in handheld mode when you just tap the screen for options instead of trying to maneuver around. It also shows this game's mobile roots with the game's UI. When you're wandering around the asylum, you'll notice a flashlight icon on top of the screen to show the flashlight's battery, but also icons for pausing the game and opening inventory. These do dim when you're moving around and not fighting enemies, but they're always there, giving you that this was originally a mobile game look to it. Next is presentation, which is pretty nice. The game looks smooth on the Switch and leagues ahead of what it was on iOS back in 2015. You can also modify the game's resolution if you want that grainier look instead of the smoother look. And with performance, it's pretty good as well. Despite having a slider in the settings for 30 FPS all the way up to 120, the Switch version does not really ever exceed 60. A lot of the game will run between 50 and 60 FPS, though there are some areas that will dip into the 30s and 40s. Thankfully, I never saw it drop under 30 outside of some stutters that can happen here and there. Some of these stutters can also be removed if you drop the in-game resolution to 75 or 50%. This also keeps the game up around 60 FPS more often. No issues with freezing or crashing, though I did have the game semi-glitch once on me, leaving this paper sack hovering in the air much to my entertainment when I walked Rose right into it looking like she was wearing it. Next up is battery life. Forgotten Memories gives the original and Lite models a range of about 3 to 4 hours, while the V2 and OLED models get 5.5 to 7 hours. In conclusion, Forgotten Memories comes to the Switch and is a pretty good horror game, offering a big Silent Hill-like vibe, creepy atmosphere, and some interesting story beats that I don't usually see in horror media. Now, on the downside, some of the menu controls and gameplay mechanics are a little clunky, and it's not that long of an adventure. But with more content on the way via updates and DLC, including 2 new story chapters, it's still a great little horror game to play on your Switch, and with far higher frame rates than most other horror games the Switch has access to. Reviews to Go rates Forgotten Memories Remastered for the Nintendo Switch a 7.5 out of 10. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.